Hey everybody, welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot. This is a Hey Mary Kay edition of the podcast. As we've kind of gotten through the first real wave of free agency, thought this would be a good time for us to get some questions from our Football Insider subscribers. Cleveland.com/Browns. The blue banner at the top of the page is where you can get signed up for that. All right, let's get right to this, Mary Kay. The first question from Russ in Portsmouth. And of course, today we had a Zoom call with Kenny Pickett, the Browns' newest quarterback addition, and he did say that he's here to compete. He believes he's going to get a chance to compete to be the starting quarterback. He, of course, believes he still is a starting quarterback in this league. So Russ in Portsmouth says, "Hey, Mary Kay, please, please, oh, please, tell me with all the grace your God can muster that the Browns didn't trade for Kenny Pickett to be their bridge quarterback." Russ apparently not a fan of old Kenny.
The Browns really did not trade for Kenny Pickett to be their starting veteran bridge quarterback. That's not really what this is about. It is an opportunity for him to come in here and compete. You're never going to tell somebody that they can't compete. In fact, if Deshaun Watson hadn't re-ruptured his Achilles, he would be in the room competing and out on the field competing for the starting job as well, too. Doesn't mean he was going to win it, but he was going to have the chance. And no, this does not mean that Kenny is the veteran bridge that's going to be out there on opening day if the rookie isn't ready to start. The plan always was going to be for the Browns to bring in an experienced veteran, a less experienced veteran, and a rookie. And then, of course, once again, Deshaun will also be in there, in the mix, recovering from his Achilles and not really starting. But this is sort of swapping out Dorian Thompson-Robinson for Kenny Pickett. I think he'll end up as the third quarterback on the roster. And quite often, I mean, he might not even be active on game day.
Yeah, I've become apparently a very pro Kenny Pickett podcaster. But I do think like there is a world where maybe Kenny would have been the perfect bridge. Like if you're going to take a guy at number 2 and you believe that guy can start super soon, like even start week 1, then, I mean, there have been situations where teams have just sort of had career backups and guys who don't really move the needle, like I'm trying. Who is that guy in Washington that was with Carson? I can't remember his name, but they, just these guys that float around the league, guys like Kenny Pickett, and they say all the right things, and then you get to week 1, and it's like, yeah, you know what? We're starting Shador or we're starting Cam Ward. So that would be the case to make for Kenny Pickett. That the plan would basically be for him to quote unquote be the starter, but honestly, it's not going to happen. Again, these courtships with Russ and the Kirk Cousins stuff that's hanging out there does really reinforce to me this idea that these other quarterbacks, taking another quarterback later in the draft, whether it's trading back into the first or taking somebody in the second or the third round or day 3, feels still as realistic as just taking a guy at number 2.
There are so many things that can happen at this point, but I am not going to move off my position that I think they really probably should take a quarterback still at number 2. I think they should take Shador. Why change your mind now? Don't get to this point. Don't get close to the finish line and then get skittish about it. Take a chance, roll the dice. What is another position really going to do for you in terms of making you or breaking you? Where as a quarterback, you can either hit it or it doesn't hit, but the chance to hit is at least something that can be transformative. So I'm pretty sure at this point, I would still, unless I talk to a bunch of people that say there's no way Shador should be the number 2 overall pick and he can't play and he's not going to start and all that stuff. I haven't heard that yet. I would still go out there and pick Shador at number 2, but then 100% I'm coming back and I'm drafting another one of the quarterbacks later in the draft. I don't know what round I would do that in. It depends on who's there and when they're there. But 4th, 5th, 6th round, I'm coming back and I'm taking another quarterback because they need to get a pipeline of quarterbacks. They need to develop some people. And it's going to have to be somebody that nobody's going to come and pluck off of your practice squad and sign to their roster. So, you don't want that to happen. But I would definitely take 2 young quarterbacks, and then I'm still going out and drafting Shador at number 2, even if they sign Russ.
Yeah, and I just think the interesting scenario in all this is obviously it's what they think of these two guys, but it's also it's almost the Shador versus Jackson Dart debate. And obviously Jackson has been kind of climbing up, at least, the people that do this for a living. We don't hear a lot of it from, obviously, no GM, no, these guys aren't going to tell us, but Jackson Dart seems to be climbing the ladder a little bit here. And I do think there are people out there, and I mentioned this on a pod the other day. I'm starting to fall into this camp that I don't know if there's that big of a gap between Shador and Jackson Dart. And so what makes that interesting is, okay, then, and you said on yesterday's pod, we'll then just take Dart at number two. Can make the case for that. But the other thing they could do is, okay, do you maybe trade the number two pick and then you move back a little bit and you take Dart a little later and then you have another pick you can work? There's a lot of different things they can do in that scenario. But of course, then you also risk somebody jumping you and maybe doing what you said, take Dart a lot higher than people think you should go. But it doesn't matter if he's your franchise quarterback. So that's where this gets interesting, is ultimately assuming Cam Ward goes number one, what exactly do they think about Shador Sanders versus Jackson Dart or some of these other quarterbacks?
Yeah, and when you look at the quarterback landscape, who knows what anybody really truly thinks about some of these quarterbacks? What if, as we have talked about before, what if some people are actually believing that perhaps Jackson Dart has leapfrogged Shador Sanders for a number of reasons? I mean, he's comparing himself to Jalen Hurts and quarterbacks like that. If he's anything like Jalen Hurts, then maybe that's something to look at. If he's more of a dual threat type of quarterback, that's something that the Browns really like. I watched him at the Senior Bowl. He was accurate. He was good. I don't know. I don't know at this point if they even know who they like better or who they are taking. And again, we've said it so many times before. They could sit up there on April 24th and tell us that they have loved Shador and they've never wavered off that point since November. And we will choose to believe them or not. But I think that there are still so many different ways that this can go. I just still sort of think that they should just not mess around and take a quarterback at number two.
Yeah, I mean, how many times do you have an opportunity to do this? Obviously, in their eyes, they're hoping that they don't have many more opportunities to make a pick this high. Even if the quarterback class isn't maybe what you'd ideally want, you should still be able to find a guy that you can work with. This class isn't. Ironically, this is not the Kenny Pickett class. I don't think. I think this class is better than that one. Okay, another veteran quarterback question. Abe in Huntington, West Virginia. Hey, Mary Kay, why do the Browns seem so resistant to run with Joe Flacco for a season? And of course, Joe is visiting the Giants today on the same day that the Giants are meeting with Russell Wilson.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this one is going to go because there are very, very few veteran quarterbacks left. Now you are really talking about Joe Flacco, Russ Wilson, and Aaron Rodgers is about it. I mean, there are a few other ones, but really not many. Gardner Minshew signed as a backup with the Chiefs. The dominoes have pretty much all fallen. So it's almost to the point now where if Russ doesn't end up here, I think it could be Joe Flacco. I really do. I think it could be Joe because I don't know who else it would be. And I don't think that's necessarily ideal for your rookie quarterback. I've said that before because I think the fans are so wacko for Flacco that I do think that that could be a possible distraction to the rookie quarterback if he's out there and they do decide that they're going to start him and give him an opportunity early on and it doesn't work out and you're at home and Joe's over there on the sidelines and fans absolutely love him. I think that could be detrimental to a rookie. I actually think it would be better to have Russ in that capacity than Joe because Browns fans aren't madly in love with Russ. They're madly in love with Joe. He saved the 2023 season for them, and they haven't forgotten that. They wanted him to come back last year. So I could see something like that happening. And the longer this goes on, the longer it seems like maybe Russ is going to end up with the Giants, perhaps. I don't know. It's hard to say. The Steelers still really want Aaron, and Russ visited the Giants last year and has, it seems, an affinity for the Giants. And so I don't know. I don't know. It almost has that vibe to it. So then the Browns would be looking at either Joe Flacco or hoping against hope that perhaps Kirk Cousins becomes available. But I think at this point that could be a bit of a pipe dream.
For Joe, why I know he loves Cleveland and I know he loved it here, but why come back and ruin a good thing? I mean, he's a cult hero here. He won those 5 games and threw for 300 yards every week and was a hero. And there'll always be that connection. You come back this year and it's probably not going to be quite as magical just because it's different. You're starting from week 1. You're not just picking it up and like throwing caution to the wind and let's see what happens. You're saving our season. You're actually just the guy from week 1 and now you're 40 years old. And I don't know, it almost feels like it would be destined for eventually Joe to have some games where he just throws a bunch of interceptions and eventually has to get benched, and it ends kind of sad for Joe here. I maybe for Joe, he should just say, you know what, I'm going to thank you, Cleveland. It was awesome. I'm just going to remain a cult hero in Cleveland forever and not come back and risk ruining that.
Well, Dan, that sounds very utopian and lovely when you describe it like that. But I'll tell you what, $4 or $5 million speaks very loudly.
Yeah, that would influence me a little bit too.
Right? Especially when you have, is it 3 children or 4 children? I can't remember. I should know that. I wrote his life story. But yeah, so he's got, I think it's 4. So he's got all these lovely children. And if somebody's going to hand you $4 or $5 million to play football instead of potentially going back on that couch again, which I don't think he would end up back on the couch again. I think he's back out into the football world for a few years, even if he has to wait a little bit for the right opportunity. But certainly if the Browns give him an opportunity, he will take it. This is a chance to be on a team. It's even a chance to start. So I don't think he would pass that up for anything. And I actually could see him having that tremendous connection with Jerry Jeudy the way that he did with Amari Cooper. I could really see that, it being good for Jerry, just that deep ball, that long ball that those two guys could have together. They could probably make something of that. But like you said, he's got to stay away from the interceptions, and he did not play a bunch of juggernauts when he went 4-1. These were not the best of the best football teams that you could possibly play, or the best pass defenses that you could play, if I recall correctly, and I'd have to go back and look it all up. But some of them were fairly inferior pass defenses. Some of them weren't good teams. Trevor Siemian was the starting quarterback for the Jets in that one game. Case Keenum was the starting quarterback in Houston for the Christmas Eve game. And I just don't know if, like you said, he will be able to bring the same kind of magic that he brought in 2023. So we'd have to see how that would all go.
Okay, let's get to another question. You mentioned this name earlier, and I thought it was interesting that somebody brought this up, Deshaun Watson, who, as we know, is in the building. He's rehabbing in Berea. We knew that back at the Combine, so it's not a surprise to see him there. So someone had a question about Deshaun Watson and his comeback and what that could look like if he maybe ends up being able to get back on the field again from the 440 area code. Hey, Mary Kay, it sounds like Deshaun Watson is in Cleveland, which he is, working out most days. What if he's healthy and based on his contract pushes them to allow him to compete in order to play? Do the Browns have to let him compete? Would they let him compete? What would that situation look like? And I'll just throw in, is it a moot point because he's probably not going to be ready in 2025?
He probably isn't going to be ready in 2025, so it probably is going to be a moot point. He'll probably start the season on the physically unable to perform list or whatever the case may be, and he probably just isn't going to be in the mix in 2025. But having said that, you can never say never because we don't know what 2025 is going to bring yet. And if he all of a sudden does get healthy and comes off of a list and is ready to play and they really need a quarterback, then you just never know. So I don't think we can rule anything out, but I don't believe he's in the plans for playing it all in 2025. When they say he's going to miss a significant amount of time, I think they're trying to set expectations. Do not plan on seeing him on the field this year. That's what they're basically telling people. So, yeah, I don't expect him to play, but again, stranger things have happened. Now, with an Achilles, it usually takes about a good 9-10 months before you're back to the point where you could start practicing again. But when it's a revision, when it's your second surgery on the same ruptured Achilles, you're going to want to give that a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra healing. And I think, I don't know if you've seen this, I'm sure you have, that his surgeon retired from surgery. And it was just so weird that all of a sudden Deshaun re-ruptures his Achilles. It's just not that common of a thing. And so I don't know. I don't know what happened there, but he may have hastened Dr. Bob Anderson's exit right out of the profession. But no, I mean, he's obviously one of the best in the business for years and years and years, renowned, noted foot and ankle specialist. But I just thought that was kind of ironic that this happens to Deshaun, and then Dr. Anderson's like, I think it's time to hang it up.
Yeah, I've got to say, I don't know if I'd ever want to be somebody's like, they do surgery on me and then they're like, you know what? I think it's time that I retire. That would give me a bad feeling. Maybe if I knew beforehand, like, hey, this is going to be my last surgery, I'm hanging it up. But like afterwards, if they're like, I've given it some thought, it's probably time to call it a career. I'd be a little concerned about that whole process.
Yes, absolutely. Especially because if you recall, Dr. Neil Elatrosh is the one that does that bridge procedure. And I believe Dr. Elatrosh operated on Aaron Rodgers' Achilles. So he could have gone that route, and Dr. Elatrosh was his shoulder surgeon. So he could have gone that route, but he opted for the renowned foot and ankle specialist, maybe not realizing that he was on the back nine.
All right. You know what though? I do want to say it just to address this question. I mean, the Browns, if he were to come back, let's say it's November and he's back on the field. First of all, I mean, he would have to be able to ramp up, right? Like it would be a process to kind of get him to a point where he could play. And the Browns aren't under any obligation to put him on a specific spot on the depth chart. I mean, they could make him their third quarterback. Like it doesn't matter. Like it honestly doesn't even matter what he looks like on the field. They aren't under any obligation to put any player in any spot on the depth chart. So, they could kind of say, yeah, you're allowed to practice, you're allowed to do all that stuff with us, but this guy's our starter. This is what we're doing, and that's just how it's going to be. Then you get into next season. Obviously, you work through that contract. Maybe they'll be able to move on after next season. Then you kind of worry about it if he's still on the roster. But I think this year it's just a matter of, even if he was able to get back on the field, I just think he would be so far away from actually being able to play an NFL football game that I don't even think it would be. I don't even think it would matter.
Yeah, I don't expect it to be an issue this year. And I do think that they have set it up so that they can move on from him after this year and that they can absorb the cap hit that they would have to take next year. So even if it's $73 million or whatever it is, I do think that they are willing and prepared to just suck it up and deal with it. And maybe they can get something for him. Maybe they can't, I have no idea. But it does seem like it has the vibe of maybe being gone after this season. If not, then maybe being gone after this season so that you're not incurring that big, huge lump sum cap hit again and you're spreading it out more. But yeah, I think he's done here. It's just a matter of, is he done in his career? Now we see quarterbacks play for a good long time into their 36, 37, 40, beyond 40 in some cases. Um, so maybe he's got more left in the tank. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to come back from one Achilles, let alone two, especially on the same leg. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a tough road for him back to the football field. But from everything I've been told, he is determined. He is ready and willing to come back and make a go of it wherever that might be.
All right, another kind of newsy question from today. Jack Conklin, of course, his contract redone as expected. He'll be back with the Browns. A little bit of a change, though, because he will, of course, be a free agent now after this season. So Herschel in Port Washington, New York says, "Hey, Mary Kay, how does it help the Browns to lower Jack Conklin's pay and give him free agency after this year? Obviously, it gives them more cap money, but then they stand to maybe lose a Pro Bowl tackle after this is all said and done."
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to think about how this benefits both sides and what the impetus for doing this was. But when they do a restructure like this, they always lower that base salary as much as they possibly can. So when we see the contract come in, he's probably going to be one of these guys that has the $1.255 million salary for 2025. And then they get the restructure bonus, and the Browns get cap relief, and it's a win-win. So I do think that they are in a world where they were maybe trying to move around some money so that they can sign Russ and see what they can do there, so that they have that available and just be ready to pull the trigger on that. So we'll have to see how that goes. But in the event that they want to keep Jack after this season, they would be able to do that. They would just have to re-sign him to another 1 year deal. So I think it's a situation where Jack loves it here. His wife is from here. They're kind of embedded in the community, and this is kind of home for him. So I do think that in the event that they want to re-sign him after this year, they'll be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think you just, again, kind of across this roster, I think over the next few years, you do want to get a little bit younger, right? You do, and then that's not saying that you don't want Jack Conklin to be part of the future, because maybe you do, but you just sort of look at everything, and Jack is turning 31 in August. He has been hurt a lot when he's been here. Obviously, when he's been healthy, he's been really good, but he's suffered two serious knee injuries while he's been here. He's come back from both and played very well. So, you do have to plan a little bit for your future. So this year, for sure, you want to have Jack Conklin because you're breaking in a new left tackle, whether it's DeJuan Jones or a rookie. But it just gives them flexibility with their roster. Like let's say they draft a left tackle who ends up being really good, or maybe that guy ends up being a right tackle, and DeJuan Jones plays well, and they kind of feel like they have a nice young tackle pairing for the future. That gives them a little flexibility if they decide they want to move on from Jack. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, trying to figure it out here on the spot, but I just think it's about obviously cap space this year, but just also some roster flexibility, over these next few years, while they actually have some draft picks and they can actually bring in young players and bring in guys on cheaper contracts and ease some of those cap burdens because of that. So I'm sure there's a little bit of that involved too. I'm sure they would love for Jack to be around for a long time, as long as he's healthy and at the right price. But again, you get a little flexibility with this, I think.
Yeah, and this way you can take it 1 year at a time with him. He can see how he's feeling. You can see how he's doing. You can see where the future is going. Maybe they do draft a tackle. We know that they had Will Campbell, arguably the best tackle in the draft, in for a top 30 visit last week. So he's from LSU. He's somebody that could be a tackle of the future. And then if DeJuan comes back, maybe you keep him or move him over to right tackle down the road for after Jack is done here, or whatever the case may be. So they do have some options as they move forward. But I did think it was kind of interesting that they brought in Will Campbell as one of their 5 first, elite top 30 visits, along with Cam, Shador, Travis Hunter, and Abdul Carter.
Yeah, and Campbell is interesting too because he's the one who kind of has the shorter arms, and some people are wondering if he might be a guard. Um, so that would be very interesting to see. I mean, again, Andrew will never tell us, and if they draft him, they'll say, "Yeah, no, we're not worried about any of that stuff." So we'll never really kind of know how they feel about it, unfortunately. But I think it's interesting they brought him in, and that's one of those things you kind of circle too. Like if they do decide we want to trade out of two, maybe it end up moving down to a spot where you'd take a Will Campbell or someone like that. So that was a very interesting visit. I thought because I don't think you're taking that guy at number two. I could be wrong, but he's probably is going to go in the top 10. I don't know. I haven't looked at a lot of mock drafts, but he's up there.
Yeah, I think he's going to go in the top 10. I really do. I think he's going to go in the top 10. And once again, stranger things have happened than the Browns taking a tackle that high. I I I wouldn't completely rule it out. I think, like you said, maybe it would be a little bit more likely if they trade back some. But the fact that they brought him in, I think they're broadcasting to the world that he is on their radar for their first round pick, and we can't slam the door shut on that at all.
Yeah, you only get 30 of those things. And obviously, there's other opportunities to go meet with people and talk to guys at pro days and things like that. But you only get you only get 30 to get to come to your building. So I do think it's significant when they're on that list. So let's get to another question. Again, this kind of goes back to the draft, and this was touching on something we were talking about earlier. It comes from Dave Barnes in Richmond, Virginia. He says, "Hey, Mary Kay, seems to me the Browns should draft Travis Hunter at 2, draft a quarterback in round 2 or 3 as a flyer, and let the young guys in draft picks play to gain experience this year." Dave says, "Let's be honest, the team isn't going anywhere. And 2 months ago, everyone said there were no good quarterbacks in this draft. Why waste time and money on a Wilson or Cousins? Go get a quarterback next year when the draft is supposed to be better. Is he missing something?" And that's a case a lot of people have made is, this class isn't a great class necessarily. The Browns have pushed back on that publicly. There's other people that have pushed back on that. But maybe you should wait till next year to go find your franchise quarterback. I think that's a flawed way to do it. But what are your thoughts when you hear a suggestion like that?
It's tough. It's a little bit tough because once again, this is not supposedly a great quarterback year. But the Browns seem to be intrigued by a number of these quarterbacks. And I don't know what, of course, we don't know what they're thinking right now, but do they see enough in a Jalen Milroe? We haven't even talked about him very much. Do they see enough in a Jalen Milroe that they think, geez, maybe we could get some Lamar Jackson type of production out of him? I honestly don't know if they would feel that way about him. It doesn't seem like he's getting very much run or buzz lately, right? I mean, he is just not the it quarterback. Jackson Dart is the it third quarterback. For a while, Will Howard was starting to gain some ground, but then he kind of had a little bit of a challenging combine, which I think sometimes people put too much stock in combine performances. You're throwing it to receivers that you've never thrown to before. It's a very sanitized situation. I think the games have so much more weight than anything that happens at the combine. But we'll have to see how that goes. I don't know. It's such a mystery at this point how they feel about any of these quarterbacks. But in terms of taking Travis or Abdul or Will or somebody at number 2, I don't think I've wavered from this very much. I don't really think that you have either. I still am going quarterback there. I think I'm going to stick to my guns on that. I have thought about the notion of taking Travis Hunter there. That's probably who I would probably take there if it wasn't a quarterback. And then coming back and getting Jackson or Jalen or someone a little bit later. But I think that's risky. I think it's risky, even if you think you can get one of those guys later. You never know what teams are going to do. So if you're counting on getting Jackson Dart anywhere else in the first round, I think you better be very careful with that line of thinking.
Yeah, I would personally try to trade up for Cam Ward. I don't think that's possible. I think the Titans, again, a lot of what they're doing sure feels like they're just setting up the cockpit for Cam Ward to come in and run things next year, but we'll see. Then you get into the Shador Sanders versus Jackson Dart. I think you have to try and solve your quarterback problem this year, though. And I think I sort of feel like saying, hey, just wait till next year's a little bit of a cop out because there's so much that's going to happen between now. I mean, we're not even to this year's draft. So we're 13 months away from next year's draft. So think of all the things that could happen between now and then. You know, from, Kevin and Andrew get fired, or maybe the team wins more than they're supposed to and they win 7, 8, 9 games and now you aren't in a position to get a guy, or some of these quarterbacks that you have circled for next year who are getting paid a lot of money now in college decide they want to go back or decide they want to stay in school. Like, I actually at this point would be a little surprised if Arch Manning came out next year, just because was he a backup in Texas for 2 years just so you could start for a year and leave? I don't know if I buy that. So I think it's riskier than ever to say, well, we'll just wait till next year's class. Now, I think it was interesting last year when a lot of teams kind of said, we're looking at next year's class, so we're going to make sure we get a quarterback this year. That makes sense. That little kind of desperation of like, we're a little iffy about next year's class, so we better just make sure we get a quarterback this year. But if you're happy with one of these guys, even if they're not perfect, even if they're not, exactly, even if they're not the next Mahomes or whatever, if there's a guy in this draft you think you can win with, I think you have to take it, because I just think you have no idea what's going to happen over these next 13 months that would guarantee that you would be able to get the quarterback you want next year.
Right. And we have talked about this issue a number of times, but I think it bears repeating here. And that is, you can take a risk on a quarterback high now because you are not shelling out the kind of money that you used to have to for these rookie quarterbacks. And so you can take one at number 2 and it's not going to break the bank for you. It's just not going to do that. And that's why I think you do see teams willing to take some chances and say, let's throw caution to the wind. This isn't perfect, but let's see if we can get anything out of this guy. And there are a number of quarterbacks who I think can fit that bill over the last 3-4 years or so. Even Kenny Pickett, right? I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers picked him in 2022 at number 20. Were they sure about him? No, they probably weren't sure about him, but it was a risk worth taking. And if it would have worked out, then they would have been sitting pretty for a while. If it doesn't work out, then you come back the next year or 2 years later and you try something else. Trey Lance didn't work out in San Francisco. They came back the next year. They drafted Brock Purdy. We can look at Anthony Richardson. The jury's going to still out on Anthony Richardson. This is going to be a prove it year for him to see what he can do. And, now he's got to go out and show what he is. But if he's not what they thought he was, they'll find a way to recover. There are just a number of guys in this category. Zach Wilson, the list goes on and on. Even Daniel Jones. That was back in 2019. But Daniel Jones, the Giants took a chance on him at number 6. And you can do that because you're not shelling out all those millions to do this. You can just take a flyer and see how it goes. So for those reasons, I would take a chance on a quarterback. And if you're not sure about Shador and you think Jackson's better, so what? Take him at number 2. It doesn't matter from a financial standpoint. It doesn't. And it's not going to set you back 100 years if you whiff and you get it wrong. It's not. You can recover and you can come back and you can find another quarterback. The Pittsburgh Steelers traded Kenny Pickett last year after 2 seasons. They gave up on him after 2 seasons. He was their number 20 pick, and they gave up on him, and they turned it over they acquired Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, and they made the playoffs last year, right? So there is certainly life after not getting it right on a quarterback in the first round these days, it's not the life sentence that it used to be.
Yeah, and I'll never forget Josh Rosen, right? Like Arizona takes him. Cliff Kingsbury's sitting there at the combine saying he's our quarterback, and then 2 months later they take Kyler Murray #1. So if they get this wrong, obviously it hurts, and obviously you lose the chance to add a talent like a Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter. But you can recover from that, like you were saying. And if they get it wrong and they lose a bunch of games, then maybe you just do it again next year. You do the Josh Rosen, Kyler Murray, and maybe it won't be these guys making that pick anyway. Maybe it'll be a new GM or a new coach, or again, there's so many variables. The only argument I would make to not just take a quarterback is if you are absolutely looking at these guys and saying no way or if you're saying Cam Ward's the only guy we like and everybody else we don't think is that guy, that changes it. But if you believe 75% on a guy, like I think this guy can be a guy who comes in and wins us games, then I think it's worth taking that shot, especially because you just so desperately need an affordable, like just having that quarterback on that rookie deal is worth so much, especially when you're dealing with this Deshaun situation.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing to consider about this is if next year is another good quarterback year, then there is a chance that some veterans will shake free next year. So if you take a risk or a chance or a flyer on a rookie this year and it doesn't work out for you, chances are you're going to be able to get your hands on one of those veterans that is going to lose his job and want an opportunity to start in 2026. Because it does seem like it's shaping up to be a pretty good quarterback class coming out next year.
Okay, there we go. A Hey Mary Kay edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Those questions came from our Football Insider subscribers, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page. You can find us on Instagram, Orange and Brown Talk. Twitter is just Orange Brown Talk. And of course, our YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. You can watch full episodes of the pod there as well. There's also some Kenny Pickett video, some shorts over there, all sorts of stuff going on our YouTube page. So check that out. Again, that's Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. Mary Kay, I'll talk to you later.
Sounds great.